So to give you a brief introduction of extension, extension is a partnership between Sarasota County and the University of Florida, as well as the USDA. What we do is we take that information from those entities and we we give it out to the community members through initiatives, through classes, outreach, and of course, like our volunteer opportunities. I am just one agent in a sea of extension agents here in our county. We have some amazing programs. So we have everything from sustainability to stormwater ponds, hurricane prep to Instapot cooking. So take a look at Eventbrite if any of those interest you. You obviously are here, so you know how to register. So on to our presentation today. So Biorational Pesticides, Alternative Products for Pest Control. So a quick overview of today's presentation is going to be a quick history of pesticides, and then we'll talk about biopesticides, a little bit about the most common products for the landscape and what they are most effective at controlling. And sprinkled throughout the presentation is going to be the main principles of integrated pest management. And that's really important because biorationals are part of an IPM program. Okay. Start our speed round. So when we use the term pesticide, we're talking about substances that are used to control, prevent, destroy, repel, attract any organism that we deem a pest. So pesticides ultimately are used to control and kill the pest. So pesticide is really the umbrella word that encompasses all the different products that we used against specific organisms. For instance, we have insecticides, which are used against insects. Fungicides are used against funguses. Miticides are used against mites. So remember that mites are not insects. They are an arachnid. So if you try to use an insecticide against a spider mite, you're going to just be frustrated because it's not going to work. But anyways, you get the picture about what the word pesticide encompasses. So pesticides are very old. They've been around for a very long time. They were used approximately 4,500 years ago with the Sumerians when they were treating for insects and mites on their crops using sulfur compounds. And then through the centuries, many of those inorganics have been used along with botanicals as well as plant extracts. But integrated pest management also used extensively in conjunction with those products. IPM is a program that incorporates different strategies such as cultural, mechanical, biological controls to manage insect pests. But it's something that takes time and effort, both in ancient times as well as today. But the 19th century, there was this extensive use of botanical products, and Pyrethrum was established as a very good insecticide. But then in the middle of the 20th century, we had the discovery of DDT. So it was the pesticide that changed the way we used pesticides, and it started the synthetic pesticide era. So DDT, dichloro-diphenyl-trichloroethane, big word. This active ingredient became that magic bullet for a short period of time before it was realized basically how incredibly destructive and detrimental it was for the environment, for people, and for wildlife. The overuse of DDT led to a quick and extensive insect resistance in many insect populations. So it was obvious that this added yet another reason why we needed to think about the way we were using pesticides, and we needed to make sure we made some adjustments, and we needed to make them fast. So DDT was the product that started that synthetic pesticide era. But the number of products that came on the market and their use increased quickly between 1950 and the 1960. The reason for that is that, synthetic pesticides, they're cheap, they work quickly, they're very effective, and they had this real broad spectrum activity. That is the fact that they controlled lots of insects with just that one product. They also had stable, long shelf life and were really easy to use. And they were relatively safe to the applicator overall. But their use allowed for more successful crops with larger yields. It helped bring down the cost of food and also brought down labor costs. So overall, the problem with this is it made us complacent, and we really got away from using IPM as part of our program. So overall, synthetics were a huge success for the most part, until this insect resistance became even more problematic. So the realization of the consequences of overuse of synthetic pesticides has led to products that we now have in our pesticide toolbox that are overall safer for us to use, for the environment as well as for wildlife, and these are the biorational pesticides. So biorational pesticides are an alternative option to conventional chemicals. They are overall safer for people, wildlife, the environment, and they have minimal impact on, they're a minimal impact pesticide. But they are a pesticide. So we always have to keep that in mind. They are a pesticide because we are using them to control or kill an insect pest. So we're going to discuss most of these today. They go by many different names. You're going to hear different things. They're going to be called biorational pesticides, alternative pesticides, botanicals, and minimal risk pesticides. However, when you hear something called reduced risk pesticide, a reduced risk pesticides, they are not a biorational. They are an actual class of conventional chemicals. So if you're using a conventional chemical, reduced risk pesticides they're newer chemistries, and they're the best option to use when you need to apply a conventional chemical, since they are typically softer, which means they're safer on beneficial insects and natural enemies. They have reduced environmental impacts, and they are a much better alternative overall than those older chemistries. Like, we've heard of OPs, the organophosphates, carbamates, and organic chlorides. These are our older chemistries, and particularly they are harsh products that, from an environmental perspective. So just remember that reduced risk pesticides are true conventional chemicals. So integrated pest management. So I can't talk about the pesticides without first discussing integrated pest management and the connection between the two. The use of any pesticide, whether it's a conventional or a biorational product, should be part of an integrated pest management strategy. So some people get intimidated or they don't understand the concept behind IPM. But if you have ever, if you ever swatted a fly or stepped on a cockroach or killed a mosquito, then you've practiced IPM. You did the job using the least invasive method, which lessened that impact on the environment. So IPM is a program that incorporates cultural, mechanical, and biological strategies to control nuisance pests. And that's, an insect or a plant. But if those initial methods are unsuccessful, then you turn to biorational products, because these are the least toxic to wildlife and to us and to the environment. So if these products don't do the job, so if you've tried the biorationals and you've used them correctly, then you can turn to conventional chemicals. But when deciding to use any chemical product, you want to use targeted insect-specific pesticides. Try at all costs to stay away from broad spectrum pesticides and systemic pesticides. They should be used very limited and on very difficult pest issues in your backyard landscape. So if you need to save a prized bush or a plant, that's when you want to use systemics. You don't want to use systemics just as a broad use across your yard, just so you don't have any pest insects, because then you're also not going to have any good insects. So the products we're going to be discussing today are those alternative products, the biorationals that are minimal risk and less toxic. But do not be fooled into thinking that they are like this magic bullet. Some of them are take a bit of time to understand how to use, but once you realize their capabilities, you're going to be pleasantly surprised on their effectiveness, and you can feel more confident that you're controlling unwanted pests without really having a big impact on the environment. So biopesticides, they're generally less toxic. So they're less toxic to non-target organisms and to the environment. They're a very powerful tool to have in your landscape maintenance toolbox to controlling pest insects. And as I've already discussed, you want to use them as part of an IPM program. So before turning to using any chemical product, you're going to want to first do a proper insect identification. So before you do anything, identify that pest. Know what insect you're looking at and make sure it's something that actually needs to be controlled and not, because it could be a beneficial insect, right? There are many reference sources as well as like webinars that talk about beneficial and pest insects. I do happen to offer one, but it's just one in a sea of information. So just make sure that you're using reference sources that are in your area or your region, right? So after you do that insect identification, other practices then should be applied before you turn to the use of pesticides. So these are going to be your cultural practices. So planting a healthy, disease-free plant in the right place. I'm one of these. I break this rule because I tend to buy those clearance plants off the shelf, which immediately sets me up for failure. And then you're going to want to do mechanical practices. So if you can trim off a pest insect infestation, if you can trim it, prune it, that's going to be your best option before you use a product on it. And then mulching will also be very beneficial in helping you cut down. So those are all mechanical practices. Then your biological controls, using natural enemies and use them to your advantage. Take care to try and recruit them to your yard. We see a lot of ladybugs and a lot of lacewings around. So, they're only around because you have some pest insects. So having a low infestation of like aphids and whitefly and mealybug is actually a good thing because you're going to bring those good beneficial bugs into your landscape. And if you don't have any pest insects, you're not going to have any biological controls because there's not going to be anything to control. But when you still have that pest issue, that's when you're going to want to consider using those biorational products. That is pest specific, sorry. And then you turn to the conventional if you need to. Okay, so general tips of biopesticides. So this is kind of overall about this line of products. So they have a fast breakdown, and most degrade rapidly in sunlight and in air and in moisture. The result is that there is little to no residual and that these products do not persist long in the environment. This is going to reduce the risk to non-target organisms, which is what we want. That's what makes them environmentally good. So, however, there are a few things to keep in mind. You need precise timing. It's really important. Remember, as I said before, they take a little time to get used to. They are not one of these things where you can just spray it and forget it for the next 2 weeks and assume that your pest issue has been taken care of. They're most effective and safe when you apply them in the morning or in the evening. This is going to minimize the chance of affecting beneficial insects, and that includes bees. And then precise timing also means you're targeting the correct insect stage of development. The immature stages are smaller and easier to kill than an adult insect. So this is where those reference sources are going to come in handy when you know what that immature stage looks like. So besides that precise timing, more frequent applications are probably going to be necessary to do the job because remember, they have that fast breakdown and there's no residual. So once they dry, they're not going to be effective. So remember that. So some natural products, so the good thing is that they're fast acting. So some of these natural products like soaps and oil will kill insects on contact. Other of these pesticides, such as like your microbial products like Bacillus thuringiensis, as well as spinosad, which is another fungus, they have to be ingested and they cause the pest to stop feeding right away or within 20 minutes. And although they stop feeding, it may take a few hours or maybe even a day or so for those insects to actually die. But the fact that you've got them to stop feeding, that's the part that you want, right? Because at that point, they're really the walking dead. Then the third general trait is that they have low toxicity. So that's low to moderate acute mammalian toxicity. That means right away within 24 hours. Remember that nothing is 100% toxicity free except for spraying nothing. So they also have low toxicity to beneficial insects, and that's what we like. But that's when they're applied correctly. So that's when you're going to be applying early in the morning or late in the afternoon, because what happens is your pest insects are going to be in that spot all the time, where your beneficials are going to move in and out of your landscape. They're going to move down in the canopy at night, and then they're going to move back up when it starts to warm up. So if you spray these things early in the morning or later in the afternoon, you're going to lessen the chance of coming in contact with those good insects. But any of these products should be handled with the same level of caution that you give any other pesticide. Remember, you're still using them to kill your pest insects. And always follow the manufacturer's instructions when you're using them. You're going to want to read that label, and also make sure you're going to use any PPE, your personal protective equipment that's on that label that states to use when you're using that product. So, as I alluded to earlier, there are some disadvantages of natural products as well. Some of those are going to be things like phytotoxicity. So this is basically burning your plant. So plants can be damaged by insecticidal soaps, and especially horticulture oils now in our heat of our summer, but other plant oils and sulfurs as well, especially at high rates, and then repeat applications. So phytotoxicity can be more pronounced also on stressed plants, right? So things that are already struggling have a high level of stress. So those stressed plants, and then hot, sunny conditions. So that label is going to tell you what plants are going to be more sensitive to phytotoxicity. So it's another good reason to read your label. Also, their cost tends to be a little bit higher than normal conventional pesticides, especially those that are on the OMRI list, so that Organic Materials Review Institute. So these are your organic products that are labeled for spraying in organic farming and organic gardening. But overall, that cost to me is worth, that little bit of extra cost is worth knowing that you're doing something good for you and for your environment. Okay, so we're going to discuss these two primary groups, so the biochemical and the microbials. But remember that biopesticides cannot be used on all insects at all times. So we're going to talk about which products work best against specific insects. And then we'll discuss the groups of biochemical products. These are the natural occurring substances that control pests. And then we're also going to discuss the microbials. So these are living microorganisms that control pests. And the thing about microbials, I love microbials, but they are quite specific, and that's why I really like them. They are a very good part of IPM management because they target specific insects. You may actually already be using one, BT. So, mosquito bits and mosquito dunks are BT. So these are what we use against mosquito larvae, also, soldier fly larvae and fungus gnats as well. But another thing to remember is that environmental conditions can also decrease the activity and the effectiveness of biorational products. So as I said at the beginning, they're very good products, but they have a bit of a learning curve. But once you learn, the little nuances about them, they're great products to use. Okay, quick drink. So first we're going to discuss the oil. So oils are plant and petroleum-based products. So in general, they're going to be most effective against small, soft-bodied insects, as well as mites, which this is a good thing. So soft-bodied insects that are immobile or slow-moving. So these are going to be things like aphids and scale, leafhopper, nymphs, and whiteflies. Thing about oils is that you have to get complete coverage by that spray for it to be effective. And these are contact pesticides. They have no residual activity, right? So they cannot prevent reinfestation from insects. So when it's dried, it's gone. That's a good thing as far as the environmental aspect of it. But it's something that you're going to have to reapply them, especially when you have a heavy infestation. I would first do that pruning and then go ahead and hit them with the biorational products. And then you're going to have to reapply it. Probably every 3 to 5 days. Their label's going to tell you that interval. But how they work. So when you spray them on the insect, they can block that insect's breathing holes. So the thing about insects is they don't have noses like us. And so along the edges of along the insect is where they have their breathing spiracles. So they breathe through the sides of their bodies. So when you spray that oil onto them, basically it covers them and it smothers them. But oil can also prevent gas exchange through egg membranes. So eggs, you can also control eggs with oils. So this is a great thing because eggs are normally really difficult to control with conventional chemicals. Many have like repellent or anti-feeding properties in them. So that's going to stop, you can spray it and it's going to stop from those infestations from building up. So this is good because it does have like an anti-repellent in it. And then a few specific oils like mineral oils, they can interfere with virus transmissions of insect vectors such as like aphids and leafhoppers. And that's going to reduce the chance of your plant getting an infection. So just a side note, piercing sucking pests are the insects that we really need to worry about since these are the ones that vector diseases to our plants. Our chewing insects, our caterpillars, our grasshoppers, those type, our beetles, they just really cause aesthetic damage to your plants. So it makes the plant look bad, but normally the plant can recover from that. It's really those piercing sucking insects that we are worried about and we need to control because they do transmit diseases. Now, our hort oils, you'll see hort oil or summer or dormant oil. These are highly refined, lightweight oils. They're most derived from petroleum-based products. Occasionally in the store, you're going to see these dormant oils. And what these are heavier oils, and they're used during the dormant times of your plants. So, here in Florida, we're never going to use them, especially in South Florida. You may be using them up in North Florida in the colder areas, but really they're typically not used in Florida because we just don't get cold enough here to use dormant oils. Hort oils are usually mixed with water and sprayed the same as you would for any liquid pesticide. They can be managed. They can manage many piercing, sucking pest insects. And then they are promoted as an insecticide or an insect repellent or both. But remember, as a repellent, once they're dried, they're no longer effective. And again, they work best against small, soft-bodied insects, as those aphids, whitefly, and mealybug, kind of our primary insects, as well as scale insects. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but just remember that horticultural oils. So oils work best against armored scale. There are two different types of scale. We have our armored scale and we have our soft scales. Armored scales, they pierce individual cells so they don't create honeydew, and so they won't create sooty mold will not be associated with armored scales. So if you have a scale infestation, and there's no black sooty mold associated with it, you can use an oil is going to work more effective. It's going to be more effective on those insects. Hort oils are extremely low toxicity and there's no residual effect. I know I'm going to keep saying that over and over. So you do have to take some precautions especially with hort oils. They can be very phytotoxic under those high temperatures, meaning your plant basically can get a sunburn. And this is going to be, especially with those waxy succulents and sensitive plants. But again, the label is going to tell you that. Hort oils can also have a pretty negative impact on natural enemies if they come in contact. So again, you're going to want to try to spray them early in the morning and late afternoon to try to avoid any contact with those natural enemies. Now, neem oil. This is another oil, but it's a specific type of oil. Neem oil is extracted from the neem tree, the seed of the neem tree, and it contains several insecticidal and fungicidal compounds, including one called azadirachtin. It does function like an insecticidal soap and a hort oil, and it does not build up resistance to neem. It doesn't build up insect resistance or pesticide resistance, which is a great thing. Remember, we talked about those with conventional chemicals. That's a really big problem, but usually with these biorational, it is not a problem. Be careful with timing. with neems as well. You don't want to affect your beneficial insects. So early morning, late afternoon are the best time. And neem oil does require direct contact and complete coverage to kill the insect. So when I say complete coverage, I mean you're spraying both the top and the bottom of the leaf. So get a really good coverage of that plant as good as you can. So some neem oils are labeled for prevention of several foliar diseases. So this is the one cool thing about neem oil that makes it different than your regular hort oils. They can control common funguses that grow on plants as well as veggie plants, such as mildews and rusts, leaf spots, as well as some stem rot. Now, azadirachtin is an extract. Is a part of that neem oil. So it's extracted from the neem seed, but it's also just it's a component of neem oil. It also contains it controls several insect groups, and it can act as a feeding deterrent or an egg-laying deterrent, a repellent. It's a direct toxin, but it's also, this is cool, an insect growth regulator. So an insect growth regulator, an IGR, basically stops an immature insect from being able to molt into an adult stage. So since adults are the only ones who reproduce, if you can stop that from becoming an adult, then you're gonna really stop that population. So IGRs are great products. But azadirachtin is not an oil. It's a component of that oil, and it is considered a true insecticide. So, it doesn't make a big difference because it does come from a good source, but just remember that it is truly it's considered a conventional chemical. Thing about the azadirachtin is that they work really good against the immature stages of chewing pests, such as like caterpillars, your sawfly larvae, weevils and flea beetles, as well as like aphids and leafhoppers. So azadirachtin actually is a really good product. It also has a kind of a slight systemic property. So systemics are things that get taken up and moved through the plant. So you can apply it to the roots. And if you need just a short term, right, it's usually used on smaller plants. Like if you really need that plant to survive, past that initial growing phase, you can use an azadirachtin drench. So you pour it in with your water, and then it's going to go throughout that plant, but it's a weak systemic. So it's not going to be long-term like a conventional systemic pesticide. So essential oils. So essential oils are often combined with different plant oils, such as pyrethrins, as well as like fish oils. The fish oils tend to smell, so I just want to give you a heads up on that one. They're promoted as an insecticide, insect repellents, or both. They have additional toxicity properties to them beyond that smothering. Remember, we talked about a lot of the oils really do what they do is they smother that insect. But you really have to practice vigilance when you're using essential oils. They're not all proven successful. Essential oils don't have to be EPA approved. They don't have to be registered. So there's no efficacy data with essential oils. So they do have to be tested for safety to us, but they don't have to be tested for effectiveness. So they are exempt from EPA registration. So there is no guarantee that they're going to be, really truly effective. But for that said, essential oils are basically known to be pretty effective components to pest control. One great aspect of essential oils is that they can affect larger insects. We talk about these hort oils, and that affects small, soft-bodied insects. Well, essential oils can get some of those bigger insects. So try it. If it doesn't work, then you go to another option. But they can be effective against those bigger insects. So some of the most common ones are like sesame, garlic, canola, soybean oils. Some herbal extracts are rosemary or peppermint, cinnamon, and clove. And then others are lavender. We know lavender is a big one. Pennyroyal, eucalyptus, A lot of those, citronella, a lot of those are used in mosquito management and in our mosquito repellents. So they are some really good products. Now, moving on, this is now the citrus oils. We'll talk about citrus oils. Really good products are citrus, the citrus oils are, but they're mainly used as products to apply to animals. They're extracted from citrus peels, and they act as a nerve poison to these pest insects. Common products that are quite effective are like D-limonene and linalool, but they're mainly, again, for indoor use and on your animals. They're used against fleas and mites are their biggest things. So fleas and mites are what you want to use these against. They do come as like aerosols, shampoos, liquids, or even like those dips that we used to do for our pets. But be cautious when you use them on plants. If there's a way you can use them on plants, they can cause phytotoxicity on sensitive plants. So you just want to check the label, and you also want to check a small part of your plant. Because what happens is a lot of times if you spray your entire plant and it does affect it, you're going to have this probably a complete defoliation of your plant. It won't kill the plant. It's just going to make it look ugly until it resupplies those leaves again. So now we're moving on. So this is the insecticidal soaps. Sorry. Insecticidal soaps are probably, besides the microbials, which I think are cool, probably my favorite. Insecticidal soaps contain potassium salts of fatty acids. They work, again, against soft-bodied pests like aphids and soft scales, psyllids, whitefly, mealybug, thrips, spider mites. So that's another good thing about biorationals is that they can work against spider mites. They work in various ways. They can remove that protective. So all insects have that protective wax coating. So the good thing about soaps is they can remove that outer wax coating from the cuticle, and it causes the insect to dehydrate. It also blocks those breathing holes. Remember, I talked about the breathing holes along the side, those sphericals, and can suffocate them. But the thing about insecticidal soaps is they also need to have direct contact with the insect for them to be effective. So just always remember, for most of the time, your biorational pesticides all need to pretty much have to have direct contact for most of them. Now, the residuals that remain on the plant after they dry have no insecticidal property, right? Once it's dry, it's not going to work. You're going to need to reapply. They do work better on soft scales than hort oils. So remember I said that hort oils are against armored scales and they don't have sooty mold associated with them. Well, the way I remember it is that think about your 3 S's. So soft scales produce that honeydew that does collect sooty mold. So your soft scales have sooty mold, and so your soaps are going to work better against them. So just remember your 3 S's and you'll be good. Now, I get this question a lot. Can I make my own soap solution? Well, the short answer to that is yes, you can, but I personally cannot recommend it, or I can't give you a recipe. And that is because we have to deliver, we deliver information that is supported through repetitive, repetition in science. So it has to be able to be that same recipe every time for us to say, yes, this is effective and this recipe is effective. So when it's something that you make in your kitchen, you may have different ingredients, right? You maybe have different, the chemistry of your water can be different. It'd be, heavy minerals in your water. And so it's really hard to give you a general, or to give you one specific recipe for insecticidal soaps. So we do know that insecticidal soaps that are sold in the store, they're registered through the EPA. They're a consistent recipe, right? The makeup of them are consistent. The active ingredient is consistent. And so we know that those are meant to be used on plants. When you use dish soap is actually a degreaser, and it's most commonly it's a synthetic detergent. They are not true soaps. So that's another thing you have to remember, is that they are not true soaps. They can burn or injure your plant depending on what type you use. But with that said, there are a ton of different recipes on the web for homemade recipes to make your own insecticidal soap. But again, if you give me if I have your email, so if I have your true name and I have your email, I'll send you a link to a UF document, or I'll send you a UF document that does have a recipe for insecticidal soaps. So I can't give it to you, but I can give you somebody who has given it. So plant extracts. So moving on to plant extracts. So these are going to be your botanicals. So this is the class that we're going to talk about, are going to be the Pyrethrins or the Pyrethrum. So these are highly concentrated compounds extracted from chrysanthemums, so mundflowers. Pyrethrins work against really a broad range of pests, such as ants and roaches and fleas, ticks and garden pests. So we've kind of expanded our pest insects with the botanicals. They're often mixed with the synthetic pesticides, but also with other natural products. They mix them with their synergist. So most of the time you're going to see a thing called piperonal butoxide. This is a really common synergist, sorry. Synergists basically have no insecticidal properties to them, but when you add them to a product, they basically, instead of 2 + 2 = 4, in this case, when you add that synergist, 2 + 2 = 5. So they really kind of just boost that product, that insecticide, to help it along. These products attack the nervous system of insects. So botanicals attack the nervous system. And what's great about those is that when it attacks the nervous system, right, they act rapidly. So what's gonna happen is that you're gonna spray that insect with a pyrethrin, and it's gonna literally look like it's gonna fall over, right? You're gonna, like, instant gratification when you use these products. However, they can, depending on the insect and the concentration of the product, they can recover fairly quickly from that as well, and they're going to be resurrected. So they'll have that instant knockdown, but it has to, sometimes they will recover. So just be aware of that. But that's, it's because they're a nerve poison. That's why they break that, they fall over very quickly when you spray it on them. They do have a short residual activity. So once you spray it, it does dry. There is going to be some residual, but not long-term, like, if you were to spray it as systemic. But they do have low mammalian toxicity, so they're pretty safe to us. Overall, pyrethrins are great products, among like the safest insecticides that you can use. But always remember to read that label when with anything you buy. Now, the one cautionary statement about pyrethrins. Pyrethrins are gradually replacing organophosphates. So your OPs and our organochlorines, those are those really toxic broad spectrum pesticides that are also toxic to us. But please don't confuse pyrethrins with pyrethroids. So pyrethroids are the synthetic analog of pyrethrins. And although they are good and they're effective products, they tend to accumulate in the environment. So pyrethroids pose a greater risk to our predators and especially our parasitoid insects. So just be aware of what you're purchasing. So pyrethroids are that synthetic analog. They're not a pyrethrin, the botanical aspect. So, try to stay. Plus, I kind of think we overuse our pyrethroids, so they can start building up in insect resistance or pesticide resistance with the pyrethroids. So moving on. So now we're going to talk about Diatomaceous. So these are our mineral insecticides. So DE, it's hard to say diatomaceous earth. DE is basically it's a fossilized silica shell of a diatom. So it's the old dead algae skeleton. So what this does, so DE is it's great against things like, insects that are crawling on the ground. This is really for DE. So inside is going to be your fleas, your cockroaches, your ants, can be against some bed bugs, but bed bugs are kind of a different entity altogether. But what DE does, it's silica shell. So it's basically like glass. And what it does, it scratches their exoskeleton, so that exterior of the insect, and it breaks through that waxy, it also absorbs that wax, but also breaks through that wax and makes a bunch of little tiny cuts on that insect, so that insect ends up drying out. So it basically desiccates and dehydrates the insect, and they eventually die. It's better used for indoors against pest insects. So again, your ants, fleas, bed bugs, cockroaches. But really, it's a powder, right? It's a powder form. So the minute it gets wet, it's no longer effective. So it's really hard, especially here in Florida, and especially in the summertime where we have a lot of rain and we have a high humidity. It's really hard to use DE outside. But DE is also effective against slugs and snails in areas that stay dry. So DE has low mammalian toxicity, so it's safe for us. You can use it as a topical on your pets, but make sure you ask your vet first before you do anything. You can use it in their bedding, which works really great. You spray their bedding, especially for like flea larvae, because that's where the flea larvae are actually living, is in that bedding, not on your pet. And so it controls things like your flea larvae, your ticks, and your lice. But if you ever use DE, always make sure that you're using either insecticidal DE, so insect grade DE, or food grade DE. Never use pool, like your swimming pool. Don't use that DE because it's a different component. It's a lot finer, because even when you're using DE for your swimming pool filter, you have to wear a respirator or you have to wear a mask, because this stuff, if it gets into your lungs, can cause massive lung damage. So always use food grade or insect grade DE. So we've discussed our soaps, our oils, our botanicals, and our inorganics, so our minerals. So now we'll move on to those microbials. So first we'll talk about BT. So Bacillus thuringiensis. So this is a naturally occurring bacterium. It's found in our soil and our water, as well as on plant surfaces. It is by far the most common used microbial. There are different subspecies available to target specific pest groups. So this is really good because they only affect one specific group and they won't harm other organisms. So the proteins in the BT are toxic to these target organisms when they are ingested, right? When they have to eat them in order for that to be effective. And they will not harm other invertebrates. So what happens is once they eat this BT, so once they ingest these toxins, those literally blow up the guts of these insects. So it's usually caterpillars that they're used against. So it punches holes in their gut lining, it blows them up from the inside out. So within a couple of days after ingesting, they die. But remember, we talked about that they really stop feeding fairly quickly after ingesting. So it's the feeding that is causing the damage. So once they stop feeding, and then it's just going to take them a few days to die. They're used against the larval or the immature stage of mainly caterpillars. So your lepidopterans, so like if you're talking about gardening, right, it's going to be your army worms are going to be a big thing, your sawfly larvae, but they also used against waxworm moths in honeybee hives. So we have other subspecies. So there's one that UF has been researching that's against the Sri Lanka weevil, which I think would be great because we know there's no product that will work against that silly little weevil that really does decimate our our landscape, especially in the summertime. BT is incredibly effective. It's also reasonably priced. Remember, we said how sometimes it costs more. Well, BT is one of those. There's so much of it on the market. The price range is really, really reasonable. And the best part is it's really a low risk to beneficial insects. Some of the drawbacks against BT is that it does break down quite rapidly in sunlight, under the UV rays. And so you really kind of have to reapply it as necessary to control your pest insects. But again, when we talk about using things like this, make sure you're spraying things, you're going to be monitoring your landscape or your garden. And when things are small, that's when you're going to want to do your applications. It's when those insects are right out of the egg, not when they're a big old, you have a big, a hornworm. It's going to be really tough to target a huge hornworm because it needs to ingest enough of it. And at one point they stop feeding as well, just because they're going to go into that pupal form. So I love BT. I think it's a great product. So the BT that we know and probably using is BTI. So this is Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis. So BTI, it's used against mosquito larvae, but it's also effective against black fly larvae and fungus gnats. You know, a lot of us tend to, I say a lot of us, meaning me, tend to overwater my houseplants. So you can use BT, the bits, the mosquito bits. You just sprinkle it on the top of your plant. And so as you water it, it's going to water that in, and it's going to take care of any fungus gnats that you might have. Research has shown that there's very little activity against dragonfly larvae, so the naiads. And we like our dragonflies, right? Because both the adult stage is a generalist feeder, so it eats a lot of pest insects, but that larval stage is aquatic and it eats mosquito larvae. So this is kind of a 1-2 punch to mosquito larvae, right? We're saving our dragonfly larvae that are attacking our mosquito larvae, but then we're also using this BTI to attack our mosquito larvae. You can use mosquito dunks, so these things, you can use these in larger bodies of water. So your mosquito bits are going to be to sprinkle in your bromeliads in small areas of, of water, but mosquito dunks, you can put them in ray barrels. If you have a really small pond, a little small water feature, 100, 150 gallons, you can put them in your stormwater drains. This is really good because there's always residual water in those stormwater drains. And so you drop one of those in and it's going to have some longevity, right? They take a lot longer to dissipate and degrade. So they're going to last a little bit longer. And then mosquito management uses BTI a great deal when they're spraying for mosquitoes. So it's a lot easier to control the larval stage of mosquitoes than it is the adult stage. But I highly recommend BT. So the other microbial that I'll talk about is spinosad. So spinosad, amazing product, has a much wider insect profile than other microbials. It's also from a soil bacteria, and it produces that same toxin to the insects. It attacks the nervous system, but it's both a contact and an ingestion. So the thing with spinosad is that the insect does not need to eat it in order for it to be effective against the insect. So it's better than other microbials in that it has that broad spectrum of activity, and it's especially good at controlling thrips. So spinosad and thrips, that's, thrips are a real problem. And so, this is a great product to controlling thrips. So it does same thing. It stops them from feeding within minutes of contact, and then they're going to die within a couple of days. So it has a very good form of toxicity aspect as on non-target organisms. So, it's good, it doesn't harm our beneficial and our non-target insects, as well as mammals and our wildlife. The one thing to remember about spinosad, and this is a real big caution, is that it's highly toxic against bees, against our honeybees, but only when it's wet, right? When you first spray it, if you come in contact with a bee, that bee is going to die. I mean, no doubt about it, that bee will die. Again, remember when we talked about spraying early morning or late in the afternoon? Our bees, although I know we see some bees, coming out in the morning, for the most part, our honeybees are going to be out in the midday where it's nice and warm and they're moving from flower to flower. So if you spray this early in the morning or late in the afternoon, you're going to really minimize your impact on honeybees. But once this is dry, it's not going to affect the honeybees in a negative way. So just please remember that with if you're going to be using spinosad, but it is a fabulous product. I'm going to just go quickly over these. We have our entomopathic fungi. So they're a typical fungi. A fungus, they thrive in moist environments. The spores germinate and then they penetrate the insect. They don't need to be ingested for them to work. They just need to come in contact with the insect. They're, one type we have are parasitic nematodes, which we don't think of them as good, but there are good nematodes out there. These nematodes work really well against soil-dwelling pests. So what they do is they enter any natural opening in that insect. So the insect doesn't have to, like DE cuts the exoskeleton. With these can enter any opening in that insect, whether it's their mouth parts, through their eyes, it doesn't matter. It gets in, anywhere it can get in. And so they're really good at controlling things like mole crickets. So entomopathic fungi are really, really good against, or nematodes are really good against controlling those mole crickets, which we have a lot of here in Florida. Now, the last thing I get a lot of questions about, and these are kind of used extensively in organic gardening, are things like vinegar and corn gluten meal. So vinegar applications only affect the tissue, right? They're not going to affect the root system at all. It's purely a contact tissue killer. So it has foliar burn down properties only and no systemic properties. I'll use vinegar any day over glyphosate. So glyphosate it has those systemic properties. It goes through the roots and it kills the roots. Vinegar is only going to burn down the tissue on the top. You're going to want to follow the label like you do any pesticide and be sure you use the proper PPE. Now, for a one-time application, you're going to want to use commercial grade, and that's usually found to be about 20%, right? Thing about this is anything over 11%. So if you look on the back and it says that active ingredient, anything over 11% can cause eye damage. Anything above 20% can cause, it's corrosive to metals as well as concrete. So it can burn holes in concrete at 20%. So, or above 20%. So be very cautious. Higher concentration is not always better. The thing about the vinegar in our pantry is only 5%. You can use that, no problem. You're just going to have to do a reapplication, in order to burn down that plant. But again, always read the label and follow it like you would for any other product. Now, corn gluten meal, and we would use this as a weed control. Okay, does it work? So it's a hit and miss. It's kind of like one of those things, with most of our natural products is that, you have to know how to use it. Corn gluten meal only acts as a pre-emergence against germination by inhibiting root formation. It does nothing against existing weeds. So once that seed germinates, right, if it's already popped open its shell and it started to come out, this is not going to work against it. It stops the seed from germinating. So it has to be down before that seed germinates. So it's used as a preventative only, right? Other things you can do is use like cardboard, right? You can put down cardboard and then put your mulch over top of it and kind of do the same thing, but only as a preventative. Now, that was the last biorational product I was going to, for this presentation, but there's a few things I didn't talk about because of time limits, but IGRs, I've talked about them a little bit, but insect growth regulators are amazing products to use. They're great in an IPM program, and I would definitely recommend those. Some of them, there are some biorationals, but most of them are conventionals. But if you're going to have to go to conventional chemicals, IGRs are a really good product to use. So I just wanted to, kind of sum it up and come back to any pesticide that you consider using. Always use it as a last resort, right? We're going to go through those IPM practices first before you get to using any product, whether it's a biorational or a conventional. You always want to know to make sure you know what insect you're targeting and you do a proper identification of it. Only do spot treatments. Target the affected area and that one area only. That's going to have your lowest impact overall. If you have only one small area of infestation, you don't need to spray all 60 foot of your hedge in order to control that one area. And then try at all costs to avoid conventionals if you can. Some of them are carcinogenic, neurotoxins, endocrine disruptors. So, there's some long-term effects that we have with some of our conventional chemicals that, our biorationals can do just as good of a job You just have to be a little bit more cognizant of your insect population at the time when they're small. You can tell how caustic your chemical is by the signal word on it. So if it's gonna have a signal word of caution or no signal word, those are the best ones to use. And then always use your PPE when you're spraying anything. Now I see that a lot, and people think, oh, it's just horticultural soaps or hort oils or insecticidal soaps. But if it says that you really need to use gloves and a long sleeve shirt, you really need to be using those because they've tested that product with that in mind, and that's going to be your most, keep you safe. So just remember, anything you use is used to kill something. So your safety should come first. There's only one of you, so take care of you and make sure you follow that label. So with that, these are the resources that I used for this program. And I want to say thank you. I know I went over a bit. It's a tough task to hit in a matter of an hour. So this is my contact information. So this has been fabulous. I know that was one of I usually have a lot of like really pretty pictures, of bugs, but it's kind of hard with biorationals. I really wanted to give you a lot of information about the biorational themselves. But with that, I appreciate you all joining. Take care.